January 19th, 2026. You're sitting at your office cubicle pretending to get a head start on work for the week. The weather outside is freezing as a record-setting North American cold wave begins to impact much of the eastern United States. It doesn't bother you much yet. It's mid-January, so we're in the middle of the NFL playoffs, the College Football Playoff National Championship is tonight, and there will certainly be worse days between now and spring. Some of your friends got the day off. It's Martin Luther King Jr. Day, a federal holiday, but not one observed by your employer. Your coworker, Mike, a common instigator in water cooler banter, trots in with a smirk. Caleb Williams is literally the most clutch quarterback of all time, he says. You pause. What Iceman did the night before was nothing short of incredible. Easily one of the most electrifying plays in recent memory. Trailing by 7, facing 4th and 4 at the LA 14, Williams takes the snap, and by the time he completes his drop, sees both Rams edge rushers beat their double teams. Caleb is known to be elusive. It was well documented in his draft profile that his play was highlighted by elite escapability, but this time he's forced to run straight backwards, turning his body completely away from any eligible receiver. After running 10 yards towards the wrong end zone, he spins, sees 3 Rams defenders in his face, fades away and launches a pass towards the corner of the end zone. At this point, anybody watching the NBC broadcast assumes this desperation throw will land harmlessly, until the camera pans to show a wide-open Cole Kmet haul in the prayer that saves the Bears' season and ties the game, sending this NFC divisional game to OT. Social media erupts while Soldier Field awaits a winner. The Bears win the coin toss, force a 3-and-out, and now just need a Cairo Santos field goal to appear in their first championship game since the 2010 NFL season. After crossing midfield, Williams attempts a deep pass to DJ Moore, and it's intercepted. Stafford is pretty clutch in his own right, and given a second attempt at a game-winning drive, engineers a Rams victory. You laugh. Mike, the Bears didn't even win. He laughs. How much does winning even matter? Chaos ensues. A Monday morning shouting match between everyone in earshot devolves into a hotbed for hot takes. It only concludes after the phrase, "You don't know ball," is whispered as your team supervisor walks past. She's giving that look to everyone that implies, it's time to get to work. A reluctant quiet settles on the caffeine and Adderall-fueled room. The question remains, who actually is the most clutch quarterback of all time? The topic is discussed often, from sports talk shows to internet threads to high school and office cafeterias. The reality is, the question is almost impossible to answer. The easy and most regularly cited approach is to simply look at the Pro Football Reference rankings that show career leaders in fourth-quarter comebacks and game-winning drives. Atop both these lists is Tom Brady. Case closed. The GOAT has 5 Super Bowl MVPs to go along with his 7 Super Bowl rings, so it's hard to argue otherwise. Surely the man responsible for 28-3 is the most clutch quarterback in NFL history. However, while Brady may still be number 1, this approach is extremely flawed. These lists are both simple counts. The guys at the top all spent over a decade in the league and started more than 200 games. That's not to take away from the accomplishment. The best ability is availability, after all. But a longer tenure typically results in beefier stats. If we pull up the NFL's career passing attempts leaders, the lists look eerily similar. To me, at least, volume is a bad barometer for something like this. Mainly because what qualifies as a fourth-quarter comeback or game-winning drive is somewhat misleading. At face value, we think of these as times when a signal caller took control during a game's closing moments and stole a win. Unfortunately, it doesn't always look like that in practice. For instance, one of Brady's game-winning drives, recorded by PFR, comes from the 2010 season in a 45-24 stomping against the 2-9 Lions. The game just happened to be tied at 24 entering the fourth quarter before the Pats ran away with it. In essence, it shows up merely by technicality. An even weirder example for Brady comes from a 2003 game against the Titans, this one registering as both a game-winning drive and fourth-quarter comeback. Brady would complete one pass for 23 yards, a pass that didn't even go for a score, and yet this counts on both his lists. Which is why when answering the question, who is the most clutch quarterback of all time, I don't see these numbers as perfect benchmarks. Being counts, they totally ignore the number of opportunities a guy had to be clutch. In the same way you wouldn't say that Jacoby Brissett is better than Joe Burrow just because he had more passing yards in 2025. Even just for Tom, Brady's Patriots were so dominant, it's not like he got the opportunity every Sunday. To fully determine the quarterbacks with the iciest genes, I wanted to analyze clutch performances net of the opportunities that QB received. By the end of this video, you will be able to decide who you think is truly the GOAT with their back against the wall. Originally, I was going to make my own top 10 and sell you whatever conclusion I landed on, but after running the numbers, I determined there are too many nuances to find a concrete answer. Who am I to tell you what factors are more important than others? If I could change your core values, I'd be working in politics or religion, not making YouTube videos. Effectively, what you'll gain by watching through to the end is the evidence you need to support your own answer. Think of it this way. I'm giving you the ammo to win this argument anytime it comes up. You can even change the answer depending on when it suits you. So, how do you delineate between clutch and technicalities? Maybe take the number of game-winning drives over total games started as a jumping-off point, but you'll quickly realize Neil O'Donnell having the same ratio as Brady could only result in catastrophe. If you aren't familiar with Neil O'Donnell, he's responsible for one of the least clutch performances to ever grace the gridiron. He threw 2 interceptions in the second half of Super Bowl 30 that all but guaranteed the Cowboys' victory. They were so bad, there's often been speculation that he was paid or forced by the mob to throw the game. If nothing else, it's a shame the Cowboys get to claim merch with such a cool Super Bowl logo. Not that one game is representative of entire careers, but Brady and O'Donnell aren't two names that should be in the same sentence unless you're talking about your Irish neighbors. Fortunately, we have access to advanced analytics dating back to 1999 thanks to sources like NFL FastStar. Sorting through play-by-play data, we can extract 2 important metrics for every snap, the first being expected points added, or EPA. On a per-play basis, this represents the change in expected points for that particular drive. It can range from 8.5 to negative 13.5. How can it be above 6? Mainly when a team is backed up in their own territory facing a 3rd or 4th down. Before the play, EPA can be negative, and a touchdown obviously swings that immensely. Going in the opposite direction, EPA can hit negative 13.5 if a team has first and goal from the 1 and then the defense scores. I actually chose to use QB EPA for this analysis. As it implies, it focuses more on the specific role the QB played during the down. It's a nice way to avoid guys being punished for factors outside their control. For example, in a 2012 game between the Lions and Titans, Stafford completes a pass to Brandon Pettigrew, who then fumbles, and it's returned by the Titans for a touchdown. The true EPA of the play exceeds negative 9, but the QB EPA is slightly above 0. Focusing just on the performance of the man under center is pretty paramount when trying to quantify moxie. The second relevant metric is win probability added, or WPA. As you might have guessed, it focuses on how a team's win probability swings after a play. It can range from 99% to negative 99%. This mark is more dependent on situational factors, considering time remaining and the score. This gives us a nice blend to observe. EPA provides a necessary consistency, while WPA won't punish a guy for throwing a pick with 10 seconds remaining. Great. Now we need to add some constraints. We'll look at every game played between 2000 and 2025, but we're only going to focus on snaps taken in the 4th quarter or overtime, and we'll look at instances when a team was tied or trailing. Of course, it's possible to be clutch without needing points, but I think most people would agree that's not really what we're looking for. No reason to vastly inflate the number of snaps either. We're also going to filter these even further by sorting for only 1 or 2 score games, so either trailing by less than or equal to 8 and 16 respectively. We've all seen what can happen in garbage time, and our metrics can't measure when a defense was playing prevent. There are some examples of teams completing 3-score comebacks in the 4th quarter alone, but I think these instances are more likely to unfairly punish a QB than acknowledge their clutch factor. Brady's efforts in Super Bowl 51 were far more noteworthy after tying the game became attainable. Originally, I was just going to focus on 1-score games, but some of the most exciting comebacks are catalyzed by these 2-score deficits. Focusing on games in which a team was tied or trailing by 16 or fewer felt like a happy medium. It ignores a lot of true garbage time while still recognizing performances where victory was mathematically feasible. Since I made this decision for both of us, I'll include data for just 1-score games as well. Unfortunately, if you want to ignore putting any sort of cutoff point, you'll have to run this analysis on your own. But if I'm being honest, I can't imagine those numbers would add up to much different results. Next, we need to determine how much we value data collected in OT. Personally, I came to the conclusion that it was more or less worthless, and changed my focus to just the fourth quarter. The reason being because overtime rules have changed dramatically since 1999. WPA being as volatile as it is in sudden death situations means these drives aren't graded on the same curve. A 2002 Brady overtime game ends after a successful coin toss and Vinatieri field goal, whereas 2021 Joe Burrow could do the same thing and still leave room for Jimmy G to find Brandon Ayuk for the game-winning touchdown. Sure, we could just look at EPA numbers, but then we're using different parameters for our metrics, and that seems disingenuous. I'll split fourth quarter and OT here again. You can make your own determination. To add some additional context for why I made this decision, let's look at some of the highest single game totals for EPA and WPA. Many of these games were skewed by additional opportunities allotted in the extra 10 to 15 minute window, especially so with WPA. Each of the top 5, whether filtered or not, come from games that went to OT. Which is fair. Again, WPA is going to swing a lot more wildly in sudden death. Now we're in a good spot to start making some observations. If we just look at the total EPA and WPA numbers, they look pretty similar to our other lists that focus on volume. What we really want to determine is how QBs impacted EPA per snap and WPA per drive. These give us nice ratios that I call clutch EPA and clutch WPA. But when we sort these, we run into our next problem: sample size. Without a set number of clutch snaps, the top of the list is guys with 1 or 2 passes in these situations, oftentimes a trick play with passes by other skill position players. That's no good. Let's try 100 snaps. Okay, better, but Bo Nix, Vince Young, Kenny Pickett, Bruce Gradkowski. While a lot of this exercise has been done to ignore volume, to me it made sense to make the barrier for entry a little bigger, the minimum hand size a little larger, if you will. I landed on 250 as the best cutoff, but it is worth wondering what propped up guys like Pickett and Gradkowski. It's actually crazy how wildly different Kenny Smallhands Pickett's production is during the fourth quarter of games. I remember seeing this discourse at some point while he was a starter, and it's pretty interesting. He's kind of the exact specimen I was looking for when conducting this analysis. When we look at Pickett's QB EPA and WPA outside of clutch moments, they're both negative. In essence, Kenny Pickett is a net liability unless his team is trailing or tied in the fourth quarter. It's uncanny. He's a guy you keep on the roster solely for game-winning drives, like when that Dutch coach brought a goalie to the 2014 World Cup explicitly for penalty shootouts. And he's not alone. Bo Nix and Vince Young are in a similar boat, but if someone told me Bo Nix is the most clutch quarterback this century, I'd clock it as rage bait and move on with my day. Sorry, Perna. So with that settled, sorting our QBs by guys that took at least 250 clutch snaps, we look at our new top 10s and damn, Burrow. So that's it, huh? Joe Burrow is the most clutch quarterback of the millennium. Let's go back to the question raised by Mike in the intro. How much does winning really matter? Seriously, the answer to that question drastically changes how the results here can be interpreted. You might say, winning isn't everything. It's still a team game after all. One guy can only do so much. You might alternatively say, winning is everything. Who cares how impressively a guy puts one up in the L column? History is written by the victors. Legacies boil down to wins and losses. Ladies and gentlemen, this smacks us face first into what I've deemed the Burrow paradox. If you're in the camp that would argue winning is irrelevant here, Joe Burrow is probably your GOAT. Shiesty ranks first of qualifying QBs in both average clutch EPA per snap and WPA per drive in one-score games, and top 3 when we include 2-score games. But it would have been so lazy of me if I didn't calculate how often a QB won when facing these situations. I took the number of unique games a QB appeared in and used that to divide the number of games they actually won to give us our third value, clutch win rate. Unfortunately, Burrow's Bengals have only won 32% of these one-score games and 27% in 2-score games. Now, that's not an atrocious number. You wouldn't expect a team to win half the games they find themselves tied or trailing in the fourth quarter, unless you have Tom Brady. Jokes aside, that's the high end, obviously, but 32% is way closer to the low end than you'd expect for a guy that clearly knows how to ball with the game on the line. His CWR is below the likes of contemporaries Daniel Jones, Kyler Murray, and Trevor Lawrence, as well as many mediocre signal callers before him like Andy Dalton or Matt Schwab and Castle. This is why I've called it the Burrow paradox. Can a quarterback be mega clutch even if he doesn't have the wins to back it up? It really does come down to what your personal opinion on the matter is. For me, I think winning is at least as important as these other numbers we're using. So for me, I wanted to normalize the values for each of these QBs relative to the sample, add them up into a cumulative clutch score, and go from there. Now that we've got the ammunition for whatever narrative your heart desires, let's dive into what I think is the most reliable approach to the most clutch QBs of the millennium, a tier list. Now, unlike a traditional tier list, we have to remember that these guys are all technically in the S tier of completing comebacks or game-winning drives. We're just dividing the S tier up even further. Just because a guy is in C tier doesn't mean he's definitively less than. Any of these guys are who you want to call on with the game on the line. We'll go through each one, talk about some of their most clutch performances, or at least my favorite from them, and discuss their stats relative to the rest of the field. To summarize, I'm focusing on all snaps a QB took when tied or trailing by 16 or less in the fourth quarter of a game, looking at their clutch scores generated from our 3 metrics, and we'll see those rankings. If you find yourself truly unhappy with the results, I'll share the Google Sheet containing all of this data in my follow-up video going through the least clutch QBs since 2000. Feel free to subscribe because that journey will be a lot more hysterical. Topping out our C tier is none other than Joe Burrow. For most of the guys on our list, we'll focus more on the games they won, but as the only reason Joe Cool is an S tier is because of these losses. They stand out to me way more. In Week 7, 2020, he'd go back and forth with Baker Mayfield and the Browns, only for his defense to give up a game-winning touchdown to Donovan Peoples-Jones. Their 4-11-1 campaign that year at least allowed them to draft Jamar Chase. In 2021, Burrow would lead a number of potential game-winning drives that ended in losses, including a weird Week 5 game against the Packers with 5 consecutive missed field goals by both sides, and that overtime game we talked about against the Niners. But that same season was the birth of the Burrow we know, most notably the second-half comeback against the Chiefs in Arrowhead, rallying back from a 21-10 deficit to win the conference. One of the games that best describes the Joe Burrow experience is a meeting that wholly reflects his frustration, the 2024 Week 17 game against the Broncos. Needing a win to keep their season alive, Burrow would deliver a number of clutch performances, only for his defense to allow Bo Nix to tie the game. Then in OT, he'd lead Cincinnati into chip shot range, only for McPherson to miss. Lucky enough to get another possession, he'd get the Bengals to the Denver 3, and instead of allowing a kicker to decide the game, end it himself by throwing a touchdown. Burrow shares the C tier with AFC North rival Lamar Jackson. Now, it's worth mentioning that when I was calculating the totals, I didn't focus just on passing plays. The 2-time NFL MVP has made his mark on the league by being the most successful dual-threat QB the league has ever seen, which is why I made sure that rushing plays counted. That said, many of Lamar's most clutch performances have come when he drops back to pass. Of course, Jackson was on the other side of those games against Burrow, but he also completed a 16-point fourth-quarter comeback against the Colts in 2021, including conversions on multiple 2-point conversions before going on to win in OT. Much like Burrow, though, you're probably more familiar with the times that Lamar or his team fell short. It really makes you wonder if they're somehow cursed. Maybe it's because of both their team's affiliations with the Cleveland Browns, with the Bengals being founded by the man the Browns are named after, and the Ravens relocating from Cleveland in the 90s, leaving Cleveland without a team for a few years. While Lamar is forced to shoulder much of the blame, you'll find he's usually the victim of his team dropping the ball more than anything. This past season, Lamar would deliver 2 massive touchdowns to Zay Flowers in the fourth quarter of their Week 18 game against the Steelers, with the winner securing the AFC North title and set to host a playoff game. Aaron Rodgers would respond with a touchdown to Calvin Austin.
Whose match is this? You put him on the team.
Though after an untimely missed extra point, Lamar would have 55 seconds to deliver a game-winning drive. On a 4th and 7 from midfield, he'd find Isaiah Likely in field goal range, only for Tyler Loop to miss the 44-yarder. And there is the 2024 divisional round against the Bills. The Ravens would struggle early on, but trailing by 8 and needing a score, Lamar would complete 6 straight passes to pull the game within 2, only for Mark Andrews to drop the game-tying 2-point conversion attempt, a play that looked eerily similar to their 2021 try against the Steelers that similarly would keep a talented Ravens team from the playoffs, an instance where Harbaugh elected to go for 2 and the win instead of taking the game to OT. Both tries would see the ball hit Andrews' hands before falling to the turf. The loss in Buffalo, just another example of Baltimore's postseason struggles during the Lamar era. That said, these faults don't take away from how Lamar has been able to put his team in position to win late in games, whether or not his guys help him out. Rounding out our C tier is Russell Wilson. Russ may catch a lot of flack these days, but the Prime Legion of Boom wouldn't have accomplished nearly as much as they did without Russ being able to deliver late in games. And hey, it wasn't his fault a pass was called on the 1-yard line in the Super Bowl. In maybe the last great moment of his storied career, Russ would lead 3 touchdown drives in Week 2 against the Cowboys, airing the ball out to both Malik Neighbors and Wan'Dale Robinson. But his most iconic clutch game of all time has to be the 2014 NFC Championship game, in which an onside kick helped the Seahawks force overtime before a beautiful Russ deep ball ended the game. Moving into B tier, we'll start with Drew Brees. No doubt Brees is a guy you'd probably expect to find higher up the list, at least based on whatever preconceived notions I had going into this. However, he similarly was a victim of not winning these close games as often as his peers, while also being brought down by some truly horrendous performances like the time he turned the ball over 4 times in the fourth quarter against the Titans. However, Brees is undoubtedly one of the all-time greats regardless of if we're discussing how clutch a guy is, and naturally his career is littered with jaw-dropping moments we remember him for. Fascinatingly, a few of his best clutch moments actually came during his tenure in San Diego. It's no wonder Nick Saban wanted this guy on the Dolphins. In 2002, he pulled off an impressive comeback against the Chiefs, going 13 of 14 for 132 yards and 2 scores in the win, a feat he'd pull off again against KC in 2004. But we all remember Drew Brees the Saint, and that's where his legacy would blossom. Despite only the 1 Super Bowl appearance, he was often clutch in the postseason. In 5 of his 8 playoff losses, Brees would lead a go-ahead or game-tying drive before his team or the refs ultimately failed him. Again, Drew, like Joe, was a victim of untimely defensive woes. Like the 2011 divisional round game against the Niners, Brees and Alex Smith would go back and forth with late scores until the Saints defense gave up a touchdown with almost no time to respond. Or the often forgotten about 3 scoring drives he'd lead before the Minneapolis Miracle. He did have an epic performance earlier that season against Washington, leading 2 touchdown drives in the final 6 minutes, going 12 of 13 for 167 yards and 2 tuds, leading the game to OT where the Saints would actually win. Really, I should have called it the Brees paradox, because he's led the most fourth-quarter go-ahead touchdowns in a game his team still lost in NFL history. There are so many examples of Brees being lights out at the end of games, it's hard to hone in on specific examples. Which is why our next guy in B tier is an even bigger surprise. But make no mistake, he deserves it. Dak Prescott. I know. The first thing you think of with Dak is the playoff moments against the Niners, whether that be sliding only for the clock to run out or taking a snap with only Zeke as a blocker. These stand out as not very good. The funny thing is, even compared to other QBs on the list, you don't see Dak's prowess at the end of games discussed often. It's kind of wild to me because there are so many games where Dak put together an absolutely mind-blowing performance that at least put the Cowboys in position to win. And I say this as someone who's always been an odd-year Dak advocate. In my fantasy leagues, I always snag him after he's had a down year. In 2023, he was an MVP candidate. Last year, he ended the season as a top 5 fantasy QB, and it felt like I could pick him whenever I wanted. That's obviously irrelevant to how clutch he is, just something I've observed. Naturally, this means this year you probably want to stay away from him. So yeah, Dak's got it. Finishing our B tier is a guy with a plethora of remarkable clutch performances, Ben Roethlisberger. I think Big Ben's legacy is often overshadowed by being in the same conference as Tom Brady and Peyton Manning. When we look through the footage, there are so many games to choose from where he made the right plays at the right time. In 2009, during a legendary shootout against Aaron Rodgers, he put up 500 yards thanks in part to a literal last-second touchdown pass to Mike Wallace in the corner of the end zone. On Christmas Day in 2016, he led 3 touchdown scoring drives in the fourth quarter to overcome a 10-point deficit and secure the division. Early in his career, he constantly ravaged his division opponents too. In back-to-back years against the Browns, he'd be down 2 scores and come back to win the game. In eerily similar fashion too, with both games including a Josh Cribbs kickoff return touchdown. No surprise, Roethlisberger owned the Browns. Before Baker, Big Ben had the most wins of any QB in Cleveland Stadium. Though, The most obvious example from his career has to be the game-winning drive in Super Bowl 43. The pass to Holmes would ultimately win the game and be one of the best in Super Bowl history, throwing a ball into triple coverage but somehow finding the spot that only his guy even had a chance to make the play. While the catch is the moment remembered, the entire drive was clutch, having to go 90 yards from their own 10 after a holding call on the first play of the possession. One of the things that sets Ben apart from the guys we previously discussed is his clutch win rate, especially when filtered for one-score games, where he reached a 49% mark. That means almost half the games in which the Steelers were tied or trailing, he was able to pull out a victory. Moving into the A tier, we start with a man who might have been even higher had his career lasted a little longer, and a guy that would actually be the most clutch quarterback of the millennium if we focused on just one-score games: Andrew Luck. This one was a bit surprising to me, and definitely stood as the type of guy I was looking for when having this conversation. Perhaps no comeback is more iconic than his 2013 wildcard victory over the Chiefs. I know we only focused on the fourth quarter and two-score games, but at half, the Colts were down 31-10, and shortly into the third, the deficit would reach 38-10. Trailing by 28, Luck would put together one of the best comebacks in NFL playoff history. In the second half, he'd go 17 for 24, putting up 314 yards en route to the massive comeback. Luck and Matt Stafford would engage in some really epic matchups despite only a handful of meetings against each other. In their 2012 matchup, Detroit would secure a 12-point lead with less than 9 to play, and then Luck would complete 4 straight passes before an interception that seemed to end things. Getting another chance, now with about 4 to play, he'd go on to lead a scoring drive north of the 2-minute warning, leading to a 75-yard drive with just a minute left that saw Luck complete a game-winning pass on 4th and 10 as time expired to Donnie Avery. Viewers familiar with my video on onside kicks will recall the time that Dallas visited Buffalo in 2007, a return to prime time for the Bills in which Tony Romo would throw 5 interceptions before leading 2 scoring drives inside the 2-minute warning that included an onside recovery. I mentioned that Tony Romo was one of the most clutch QBs of the millennium, and it's true. The current CBS color commentator also finds himself in A tier. It's really funny how similar Dak and Romo are in terms of being able to simply play a completely different game in the fourth quarter. Maybe if Kenny Pickett were a Cowboy, he'd be on a similar trajectory. We could talk about dozens of games in which Romo really exemplified this, but my favorite has to be Week 2 2011 against the Niners. Romo would get knocked out of the game just before halftime with what commentators would describe as a rib or lung injury. He'd watch the third quarter from the locker room as John Kitna would throw 2 interceptions and the Niners secured a 7-point lead. He'd demonstrate the kind of toughness we just love to see as he forces his way back onto the field to then lead 2 scoring drives late in the fourth to force overtime, and then take advantage of his possession in sudden death to secure the win. Turns out, he not only fractured ribs, but also had a punctured lung before returning to the game. There's also the time he ruined Odell's catch with a late touchdown to Dez Bryant, a 2015 comeback victory in the playoffs against the Lions, and a game-winning touchdown against the Giants, where he drops the snap before finding Jason Witten over the middle for the win. Romo really is a legend. Our top member of A tier is dangerously close to being an S tier, but much like his contemporaries lacks the win rate that would put him on par with the guys at the top. That of course being Josh Allen. In Week 1 of 2025, he led the Bills back from down 15 in the fourth quarter to win an instant classic against Baltimore. This game included 4 fourth-quarter scoring drives by Allen, aided by the rare Derrick Henry fumble. It's still an insane comeback. And while I'm just as liable to bring up 13 seconds, Allen really was so clutch in this one. The reason it became memorable was the fact that Mahomes and Allen went blow for blow and is responsible for the rule change that ensured both teams would receive at least 1 possession in OT. In the 2025 playoffs, he'd lead a game-winning drive in Jacksonville, one that proved so important for how he's perceived, as the weaker AFC playoff field was primed for the taking, though a rough showing in Denver would do little to keep critics silenced. With the highest clutch EPA per snap in 2-score games, there are few QBs over the past 25 years you'd rather have late in the game than JA-17. We'll see if the coaching change and addition of DJ Moore can get his Bills over the hump. One of the guys you'd have to take over him, of course, is AFC rival and kryptonite Patrick Mahomes, who is our first member of S tier. Kermit has won an astounding 52% of games in which his team was tied or trailing at some point in the fourth quarter. He's certainly been the benefactor of elite defensive performances, but with 2 of his most clutch games coming in the playoffs, one being in the Super Bowl, it's hard to say that there are any other active QBs you'd rather see in such a situation. Mahomes' ability to manage these late-game situations is nothing short of incredible. I could go into any number of games he's put up a double-digit clutch EPA, but with how tired NFL fans are of the current Chiefs dynasty, it almost feels unnecessary. We all know how true it is. In 2024, a metric used to critique KC's sustainability was their record in one-score games, with many suggesting they're simply lucky to be on the winning side so often. The reality is, this isn't some fluke or statistical anomaly. It's the result of having the most clutch QB currently in the league. Another QB that was often accused of getting lucky instead of being lights out was Tom Brady, the next guy in S tier. Again, this should come as no surprise. 2 of Brady's most clutch performances came in the Super Bowl. I should note that I considered adding an additional filter for postseason games, but even when I went through it to take a look, it came as no surprise that the results barely changed. Brady is the GOAT for a reason. The funniest thing of note when looking at his iciest games is that they're often not remembered for exactly what Brady is capable of, but rather the blame assigned to his opponents. In the 2018 AFC Championship, there is the officiating questions. 28-3 is often used to laugh at Falcons fans more than it is to laud TB12 for the comeback. The Malcolm Butler interception precedes any discussion of Tom's 2 fourth-quarter scoring drives to overcome a 10-point deficit. And there are so many more examples he gives us, it's almost impossible to narrow it down. If I learned nothing else rooting against this man for the better part of 2 decades, it's that you really can't give him the ball with a chance to win. It always felt like a foregone conclusion. It almost took the excitement away from these games. As soon as the Patriots offense took the field, the energy would be palpable. A comeback was inevitable. 56% of the time the Pats were tied or trailing, Brady would end the game victorious. The highest among anyone in our sample, only rivaled by the other guys in S tier. And finally, finishing off the S tier and our list is none other than a second man with the initials PM, better known as the Sheriff, Peyton Manning. It's worth pointing out that Manning's first 2 seasons weren't included in our analysis, which could go either way. In 98, he set the rookie record for interceptions, but in 99, he finished second in MVP voting along with a 13-3 record. This Sports Illustrated article I found regarding Peyton's performance in a 2009 playoff game against the Jets just about sums up everything with the Hall of Famer. With Brady, everything felt inevitable. With Manning, it was more, how are they going to do this, and then watching Manning make everything look easy. So anyway, that's my tier list of the most clutch quarterbacks of the past 25 years. I'm sure there will be plenty of questions, so feel free to leave those in the comments. Obviously, this list excludes the likes of guys that came before this millennium, so I acknowledge the absence of guys like Joe Montana, Dan Marino, Terry Bradshaw. It would definitely change things. If you're interested in seeing who the least clutch QBs are, subscribe to see my follow-up video. I hope y'all enjoyed this project. Have a good one.